happy to be back. I was gone last weekend, as some of you know, in the magical town of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on this amazing spiritual conference. And I have to say that I did miss all of you. I wasn't expecting to, I was like, I'm tired. But as soon as I landed, I'm like, oh. And then I checked on Facebook when the U-Nite service went on and checked in as if I was here. So definitely my heart was with all of you. But it's great to be back and to kind of reintegrate. I'm still reintegrating a very intense week. And so today, I was so excited that Peggy was joining us today to share this beautiful song, How Can I Keep from Singing? To me, embodies the power of zeal, which is the topic for today. So zeal here in Unity can be seen in common day parlance as just the word enthusiasm. But from a more poetic sense, zeal can be seen as inner fire. And that's how I like to think of zeal. So when I think about zeal, and I think about what zeal would be like as a person, I thought about zeal as this little girl skipping along and singing in the rain. And I thought about zeal as Daenerys Stormborn from Game of Thrones, the one who's the crusader going out, the queen of dragons, right? But when you think of zeal, then you go back all the way to history where Joan of Arc is like the caricature of zeal, the embodiment, an actual historic crusader. And when I thought about zeal and enthusiasm and inner fire, I thought also of a football player who's like right there going into the end zone, right? Like right there about to do it, that enthusiasm and that zest. And I thought about Salvi Perez at the end of a game that they win, taking that ice bucket and tossing it on anyone who's near. That's zeal and enthusiasm, right? I thought about all these different ways in which I see and image a person whom I think of as possessing this innate quality called zeal and possessing it in bounds, right? Yeah, and so, but today what I want to talk about is a lot of times, again, here as we study the 12 powers, it's the bringing it to our realization that while a lot of times we look outside for faces and people that embody these spiritual qualities, that they are actually qualities that are innate, intrinsic to each and every one of us. So I'm going to start today with this foundational idea that zeal is a quality that all of us possess in terms of infinity amounts, right? So we all possess this quality. The trick is not in whether we possess it, but in how we direct or misdirect it. And when I say misdirect, I see a few new faces in here, and so I want to share again something I repeat almost every Sunday, which is the unity perspective isn't when we say, oh, we should or should not do something. It's not coming from the idea that somehow innately we believe that we are these things born in original sin and that we have to come to church to learn the ways in which we can conquer that sin and then be saved. Instead of that, our perspective here in Unity is simply that we are dreaming a dream of separation and that we need to awaken from that dream. The 12 powers, as this series of 12 different weeks we're doing, is about laying hold of these innate spiritual gifts that each of us has, looking at the ways in which we use that power from what we call material or sense consciousness, the ways we use that power in ways that come from a limited perspective of who we are and what the world is like, and then instead turning and using that power from what we call Christ consciousness. And by that, all we mean is an awakened consciousness, a consciousness that knows that we are one with all that is, that all zeal, as well as all the other powers, reside within us, are woven into the fabric of our being, and are here for us to use in service to our highest good. But on the topic of zeal, I saw someone post on Facebook, one of our congregants here posted this line from Alice in Wonderland, if you remember that book or the movie in some of our cases. And what I love about this story is it's, to me, the way most of us use zeal. So in this conversation, in this passage, it says this: Alice, the main character in Alice in Wonderland, is asking, she's lost, right? She asks the Cheshire Cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" And the cat says, "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," right? And Alice says, "I don't much care where." And the cat replies, "Then it doesn't matter which way you go." Alice, "So long as I get somewhere." The cat says, "Oh, you're sure to do that, if only you walk long enough." For me, this story actually embodies the way that most of us use, what I would say misdirect our faculty of zeal. Each and every morning we get up and we're raring to go. We don't know exactly what our purpose is and what our mission is for the day, what our intention is, but we get up and then we are swayed by every which way. It doesn't matter. We can just go and we can walk this enthusiastically. And it doesn't matter because we are not in sight of our own intention for where we want to go. And so I want to look today at the way in which it's not that we don't possess enough zeal. It's that our life energy is used, funneled, distracted in so many different ways, especially in this consumer, materialistic, oriented culture, right? In which we take our life force and then, instead of having an inward intention, we face the world and there's this distraction calling us to this purpose or that purpose. And by the time we're done, at the end of the day, our zeal is spent. But we have gotten nowhere that we really want to be. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity movement, teaches zeal as this sense of deep aliveness, this forward thrust in life, an inward fire, he says, of the soul that urges us onward, regardless of the intellectual mind of caution and conservatism. There's a slide that shows his quote on zeal. Zeal is the mighty force, he says, that incites the winds, the tides, the storms. It urges the planet on its course and spurs the ant to greater exertion. It is the urge behind all things. Zeal is the affirmative impulse of existence. Its command is go forward. But again, the problem with zeal is it doesn't answer for us. Which way am I supposed to go? How long am I supposed to go this way for? And are there rest stops along the way? Right, that's what I want to know. And so it's important to note that zeal is the 10th of our 12 powers, so I will always hark back to the development of these other powers, and especially in wisdom, in helping us to ground our enthusiasm each and every day with this wise, internally guided way of being, so that as we look forward, our agenda doesn't pull us, but instead we write from the inside out what is our life, what is our path, from the inside out. So today, I want to share 3 different points about zeal. The first 2 are the ways in which I know I personally, and most of us, I believe, can be distracted and diffuse in our application of this tremendous life force within us. The first, zeal can be spent in and diffused in these material pursuits. Second, I want to talk about how zeal can also be misdirected toward resisting life as it is, again, an outward focus, but also really well focused, not diffused at all, just focused on changing something else or someone else. We can do this with absolute fervor and focus, right? And so the two ways that we spend our life force in every day. And then finally, I'll come back to what unity invites us to consider is the highest use of our zeal force, which is simply to know God. And by God, another way of saying it is to simply know truth. And another way of saying that is not to know truth intellectually, but to know truth as the very fabric of my being, as an experience that within me that actually transforms me and my consciousness, helps me to know viscerally and in my heart my oneness with life, and to have my life force then be an expression of that knowing. So these 3 points. And I'll start with a story from the Bible. You know, I almost never quote the Bible, but here we go. So each of the 12 powers is represented by one of the disciples in the Bible. In this case, the disciple that represents zeal is Simon. I want to talk about Simon in these first 2 points. So Simon is described in 2 fundamental ways in the Bible. First, he's described as a Canaan because of where he's from. And then he's described as Simon the Zealot, which refers to the activities that he was engaged in before he came across Jesus and started to follow Jesus. And so I want to talk about this first. So according to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, Canaan comes from the Hebrew word meaning lowland. And so metaphysically, that's interpreted to be about that base, meaning that material foundation of life. And so we see Simon originally as representing one who exists in and for material things before he meets and follows Jesus. And so again, symbolically, which is how we interpret the Bible, before we awaken to the spiritual ideas of oneness and of our own wholeness, before we awaken to this notion of our connected to all of life, we think we're the separate player out here, and that life is out there, and we need to accumulate, possess it, relationships, the right career, the right job. And I know for me, maybe I shouldn't just talk about all of you, for me, I'd say the first few decades of my life were spent in a pursuit of that, right? And so again, we're not deeming this morally wrong. But for many of us, when we arrive into this spiritual awakening, we've come to realize that the pursuit of things, careers, possessions, beautiful homes, cars, that stuff in the outer didn't feed us. That it left us empty or bankrupt. That there was an insufficiency to it and a constant motion toward it in which we never find peace or fulfillment. And the world keeps telling us every morning when we wake up, the advertisements, the notifications on social media keep telling us that next activity, even a spiritual class out there, go get them. And then you will finally have the kingdom of heaven, right? So the idea is this constant pressing forward out there. And I know many of us are aware of this, right? I know I am, but I still have to be reminded on a daily basis not to look out there to the next event, the next course, the next inspiring book, but instead use my zeal to go inward. And we'll talk more about that in the last part of today's talk. But so I invite you to consider right now how you spend your life energy each day. And maybe many of you have started to shift that focus from the outer to the development of the inner. But the question is, does the shift today reflect what you truly believe is the source of your good? If your life force were big bucks, where are you spending those bucks? Right? When we say we are spent after all this doing. So I invite you to consider that and consider maybe even just one way we take $10 back, we take 10 minutes back, and we bring it to something more core to what feeds our soul. Just 10 minutes each day this week. Simon was also called Simon the Zealot. He was active formally in what was known as the Zealots back then. The Zealots were these group of fanatics who lived out in the mountains, and they fought the Romans and were actually trying to help free their own country from the Roman and foreign domination. So the Zealots were a group of folks who were striving for self-government. And Simon was out there with them working this worldly goal of self-government for the Jewish people, for his people. And in that, again, he was named repeatedly the Zealot. And so, according to the Bible, the Zealots were this rough group of people who were living this very hard life, and they were fighting continually. They were resisting. They were resenting. And yet, despite all of that, the hardship, they justified their actions by saying that they were motivated by this inner flame of devotion to this ideal outside themselves. And so reading this about Simon caused me to reflect on that quality within me, which I invite you to reflect on within yourself. That quality within you that is passionate or ardent about a worldly cause. Maybe it's animals. Maybe it's empowering women. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's changing the political system. Maybe it's healthcare. But whatever it is, I am not saying not to work towards that goal. Instead, I'm inviting you to do something that symbolically and in a way literally Simon did. He was in the midst of striving for this worldly goal, but when he met Jesus, he put down his worldly activities and followed the path of the Christ. Is how can we, in the midst of our fervor to change something in the world, or maybe your project is not a worldly cause, maybe your project is your husband, maybe your project is your child, to consider stepping back from that and then considering, how do I focus my energies on following Jesus the Christ? And what does that even mean? So, Simon, for us, again, the idea is not that we follow a person. To the contrary, to us, even Jesus is symbolic of a higher calling. The idea is this, that the Christ Spirit dwells in each of us. And at times in our lives, when we're called to spiritual community, we're called to seek in a certain way, there is like this waking up, this part of us that says, set down what you've been doing and the path that you've been on and follow me. Your inner guidance, a higher knowing, a deep wisdom inside yourself that says, your efforts to push against the world that have caused you so much strain and pain are not the needed way. There is another way follow me. This idea, this thought form inside ourselves, the Christ. I know for me that was really clear when in the midst of my legal career, I had this very formal calling to leave everything behind and follow my path to ministry. But what's really interesting about my personal call to ministry is that even from the beginning, I had this deep knowing that it wasn't that I was supposed to do this worldly thing called become a minister. It was that the path of becoming a minister was going to make me into more of who I really am. And so we get this call that appears to be the outer call, but it's really a call to do a certain inner work that is to transform ourselves so that we can be not some vision of something out there, but more truly what we really are. That's the idea. We awaken to the truth of who, of what we really are. Follow me. That me is inside each of us. And so, I want to share this story. Here in Unity, we often see that there are many folks who come from different religious traditions who come here, find this teaching, and we're like, oh, this is amazing, this is it, this is what I've been looking for, and we're so excited. But then we turn around and we become zealots for unity, right? These people tell me, I just wish all of my family and friends could know this, right? Could learn this, could teach this. And I'm like thinking, well, you can start too. Like this idea that we become zealots when we're new to something, when we learn something. And I had this great story that I heard on the extreme end of being a zealot for truth, if you will, a zealot for God. So a man tells a story about seeing another man on a bridge, about to jump. And, in the words of this man, you could pretend I'm this guy, I said, don't do it. And the guy on the bridge says, nobody loves me. And I said, God loves you. Do you believe in God? And he said, yes. I said, are you a Christian or a Jew? And he said, a Christian. I said, me too. Protestant or Catholic? He said, Protestant. I said, me too. What franchise? He said, Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? He said, Northern Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist? He said, Northern Conservative Baptist. Me too. I said, Northern Conservative Baptist, Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist, Eastern region? He said, Northern Conservative Baptist, Great Lakes region. And I'm like, me too. And I said, wait, Northern Conservative Baptist, Great Lakes region, Council of 1879 or Council of 1912? And he said, Northern Conservative Baptist, Great Lakes region, Council of 1912. I said, die, heretic, and pushed him over. So I just wanted to be clear that to be zealous for God is not about enforcing our idea of God on another. It is about being enthusiastic for our inner transformation, for our experience of God. In Keep a True Lent, co-founder of the Unity Movement, Charles Fillmore said this: excessive zeal in religious forms of worship eats up the purely spiritual. When we become very zealous in observing the rites of the church, we are prone to forget the church itself, which is Christ, the indwelling divinity, present in each and every person. equally. At the same time, I can say this, you can listen, you can go to another class, and I can say this again. But what we're talking about is, again, not this intellectual understanding of this truth, but something we get at only through the purification of consciousness that happens through the processes of prayer and meditation. Because it is through this process that really, because how many of us have told ourselves intellectually, today I'm going to get up and I'm going to live my true soul's calling and I'm going to serve the highest and best in me. We get up and Facebook has a notification and and our kids come crying out, our pets come crying out, and by the time we're done, our day is spent, right? We can know this intellectually, but until we practice it so that our very being is transformed, we don't begin to outpicture or live this truth. And when we don't do that initial work and we only talk about zeal, we end up applying our zeal without right judgment. And there's a great story shared in Reverend Paul Hasselbeck's book, Power Up, on the topic of enthusiasm without judgment. In this story, there's a young salesman who's called into his manager's office. And the manager, she tells him this, "Richard, you're an excellent salesman. You have a lot of natural talent, but you need to be more enthusiastic. Your sales are average, but I know you're better than that," she says. "You could be the best salesperson we've ever had if you just be more enthusiastic," she says, endeavoring to liven him up a bit. "Are you open for a suggestion?" He's a good employee, this Richard, and he says, "Well, yes, of course. I do appreciate your help," he says. "So, okay," she tells him, "this is what I want you to do. When you get up tomorrow morning, I want you to jump out of bed, stand in front of the mirror, say to yourself, 'I'm great, I'm great, I'm great.' Then I want you to get dressed enthusiastically, run down the steps, eat a high-energy breakfast, and come to work all charged up with energy. Can you do that?" she says. "I'll certainly try," he said with some hope, kind of mustering up some enthusiasm. The next morning, Richard arrives 2 hours late for work. His manager is just devastated. "Richard," she says, "what happened? Why are you 2 hours late?" "I did exactly as you told me," he said. "I jumped out of bed, I stood in front of the mirror and said, 'I'm great, I'm great, I'm great.' I got dressed, I rushed down the stairs and kissed my wife enthusiastically. And that's why I'm 2 hours late." Sometimes impulsiveness can lead to wonderful results. But the lesson is it's generally good to temper our enthusiasm with wisdom. Wisdom. So, funny. But we do this, okay. How do I want to shift into this? So we do this, and I know that as I was sharing about the ways we get distracted by life, it's funny, the different ways in which we get distracted. It's funny, and for me, it's also deeply sad, right? And as I was reflecting and trying to take this power of zeal a little deeper into my body, my system, and to really ask myself, why is it really that I don't kind of go here? Why don't I stay here? Why don't I do the practice more than I do? Why don't I stay home here in my being? Why do I let all these other things move me and distract me? Well, certainly there's a certain deal of social conditioning that happens, right? But I think one fundamental thing about our culture that I feel, that I know that was modeled in my family, was this idea somehow that we should not have to suffer. This message that somehow suffering isn't part of the human condition. Or, even worse, that we don't have the tools or capacity to endure our own pain. And so we're not taught that we can sit in our tears or our anger. And so some of that, flitting about, diffusing of energy is the way society's like, no, come out here. The pleasure's out here. You don't have to feel that. And I know that for me, what happened in my own life was that, ironically, you do all those things out there. You form addictions to games, to television, to food, to constant doing, to people, so that you don't have to feel and sit with this suffering, this pain right here. And the problem with that, though, is that the more time we spend out here, the more the pain builds in here. The more it's unaddressed, the bigger it gets, the scarier it looks, the more we stay out there, and this vicious cycle continues. The spiritual poet Mark Nepo wrote a beautiful book about different ways to listen. And in this book, he talks a lot about this idea that we need to really bring the fire of our enthusiasm to the space of our suffering so that we could light it up with our own power and transform and finally transmute that suffering. That we need to stay in here. And for those of you who, like me at the end of my law career, could barely muster the enthusiasm to go to work, to do this job or that. If you're in that place at all in your life, not like tons of enthusiasm, feeling listless, I might invite you to consider this, that constant doing is not helping, that instead it's a coming home to this, that actually in our pain is also our inner fire, that they're in the same place. And when we're willing to come back here and sit in our suffering, we also get the gifts. And there's a poem, But How, by Mark Nepo, that describes this. And he says this: "It is said that souls intent on living will reach deep into their wound and bring out the fire living there, which out in the open turns to light. It is said that those intent on making things better will reach deep into their minds and bring out the fire there, which out in the open turns to truth. It is said that those who love like rain soothe every fire." We all have ample zeal. The question is whether we dilute it, spending it in various different directions. The question is also whether we are willing to go into our suffering when we are feeling listless and apathetic about any area of our life, to revisit our suffering to see whether we might find our inner fire residing right there also. And we go back to this place to replenish ourselves, because the idea is this: when we're out over there, we are disconnected from the source, that infinite source of renewal for our energy. when we come back here. And to this point, this is the point I still struggle with the most. So it's very interesting that my throat gets hoarse as I'm about to say it, but also that I somehow left it out of the final version of my talk. So I had to pull it up from the slides because it's the point about self-care. But I'm going to read it for myself as well as for you all. The divine command is take time to be holy. I'm quick to do the bidding of Spirit and use a portion of my zeal in establishing God's kingdom within me. I do not put all my enthusiasm into helping others. My own unfoldment is of great importance to me. My own unfoldment is of great importance to me. I love to aid my brother, but I do not allow that idea to rob me of the power to demonstrate truth for myself. Charles Fillmore, keep a true lens. So I'm going to invite us now to do the very thing we've been talking about, which is take that fervor, that inner fire for life, and bring it inward.